Hey guys, today's episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by the Sports Spectrum magazine. I'm telling you, it's probably the best thing that we do here at Sports Spectrum, a quarterly magazine, 4 issues each year, and it's super cheap, $18 for a 1-year subscription, $30 for a 2-year subscription. The Sports Spectrum magazine has been around since 1985 with Dr. J. Julius Irving on the cover. And so I want to recommend that you check out the Sports Spectrum magazine. It makes a great resource. It's perfect for the kiddos. So you can check it out at sportspectrum.com right now to subscribe and get our Sports Spectrum magazine. Sportspectrum.com. Subscribe today.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
And welcome everyone to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. We got a great conversation today with Brian Smith. Can't wait for you to hear it here on Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith. And you can find us on our website, sportspectrum.com. That is the place to go to if you're looking for devotionals, articles, podcasts, testimonials, videos, all free. It's free content. It's all available at sportspectrum.com. We like to say it's a resource, a chance for you to share the gospel with someone who shares a commonality in the sports world as a sports fan, maybe a coach, maybe an athlete, a chance for you to check all that out at sportspectrum.com and use the content there as a resource for you to share Jesus with someone else. You can also email me directly if you'd like to get in touch with me. Jason@sportspectrum.com is my email address. Jason@sportspectrum.com. Today on the show, Brian Smith is our guest. He is the author of The Christian Athlete, a very apropos title for the type of podcast that we have, Faith and Sports. That book releases April 5th, and Brian serves full-time with athletes in action, and we love athletes in action and the work that they get to do with athletes in the high school and the college world, sharing Jesus, working through the development of their faith with these athletes in action, if you will, and Brian serves full-time with them. In this book, The Christian Athlete, we're going to talk about it throughout, but it really takes us into a conversation with Brian on a deeper level about just being a believer in the sports space, athletes, coaches, broadcasters, living our faith out as followers of Jesus in this sports arena that attracts so many people from so many different backgrounds and beliefs and religions. How do we do that? How do we live out our faith as Christians in this sports world? Brian Smith is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Let's take a listen now. Brian Smith, welcome to Sports Spectrum, buddy. How are you?
I'm great, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's good to talk with you. Let's start as we record this. It's not far removed from the NFL season being over. And as we record this, I look at your background there on the Zoom, and there's a Barry Sanders jersey hanging, which leads me to believe you're a Lions fan, which also leads me to believe that you have some thoughts on Matthew Stafford winning his first Super Bowl. Kind of describe your feelings and your thoughts when Stafford was first traded and now watching him accomplish what, the Lions have still not been able to do, and that is win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. Thanks for starting with
Sorry for the reminder.
Won the Super Bowl. Used to it as a Lions fan. Yeah. When Stafford got traded, what was my first response? I'm in a group text with my dad and my brother. We talk Lions all the time. There was a mixture of sadness because we all just love the guy. He's one of those guys, and I think Dan Orlovsky has mentioned this multiple times. Like, despite the Lions losing year after year, Stafford would never throw anybody under the bus. And so besides being super talented, he's just a really, really likable guy. Yes. And so I was sad in that respect. I felt like it was time, though. Like, I was glad that he got an opportunity to go to a good team like the Rams. I was glad the Lions got what I thought was pretty fairly compensated for it. To be honest, when the playoffs started, I was rooting against the Rams because the Lions get their first round pick. And so even though I like Stafford, I'm like, man, I like the Lions more. And so I would love to see the Rams lose. And then as he kept advancing, I couldn't help but cheering for the guy. So
I
I
always
love the
say,
Lions probably too much.
yeah, I was just going to say, I always tell people if you meet a Lions fan, understand that they're really a Lions fan. There's no such thing as a bandwagon Lions fan because of the struggles, let's just say, that they've had for so many years. One playoff win, which happened to be against my Dallas Cowboys in 1991. It's been a long time since they were, having the success that you would hope, even like a team like the Rams just had in the playoffs. Where does the love of the Lions come from? I'm guessing that number 20 jersey has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, so I'm from Michigan. I grew up in the Grand Rapids area. And my dad was a huge Lions fan growing up, and we grew up going to games. And so I remember being in the Pontiac Silverdome watching Barry Sanders and Scott Mitchell and Jason Hanson, kind of the oldie Lions group, Herman Moore. In fact, one of my first games, and it's kind of set the tone for my entire fandom with the Lions. They had tied the game in the final second. No, they didn't tie it. They scored a touchdown and they just need to kick the extra point to tie it in the final seconds, and they missed the extra point. It was like, we're so excited that they scored in the final seconds, then they missed the extra point. It's like that has been my Detroit Lions experience right there. There's like this cautious optimism. You get excited, but something's going to happen that has never happened before, that could only happen to the Lions. So
what do you think would happen if the Lions won a Super Bowl? How do you think you'd react?
Oh man, I hope I would get to go to it. Like I know the ticket prices are getting super expensive now, but yeah, I would hope I would get to go with my dad and my brother too. So yeah, I would imagine us just screaming like girls.
Would you be able to contain yourself? That's what I feel like. It's been a long time since the Cowboys won a Super Bowl, but I was live to see 3 of them in the 90s. And I remember being so excited for that, even though I was in my early 20s. It's been a long time, but Detroit hasn't even tasted that. I think they got to an NFC championship game in that 91 season, and that was it. So I wonder how Lions fans would handle, kind of like Red Sox fans, when they won the World Series in 2004, it had been 86 years or whatever it was. I wonder what Lions fans would be like if they actually won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I would hope that as somebody who works in Christian sports ministry, that I would have perspective and I wouldn't be too crazy about it. But I think I would go off the rails, and I would be pumped. I would say though that of course, we start talking about the Lions, you're going to get me going here. But the Lions played the Cowboys a couple of years ago in the playoffs, and they were going to win that game, Jason.
Yes, they were.
It was like 3rd down. They were driving, and it was offensive pass interference. The ref threw the flag, and they picked it up, and the Lions went on to turn it over on downs. Cowboys scored, and that was that. But it's like those little things that, Stafford could still be with the Lions had the Lions won that playoff game and maybe done some more damage in the playoffs, because they had one of the best defenses in the league that year with Ndamukong Suh. But it's like there's just those small moments that if they would have bounced the other way or the refs would not have picked up that flag, like who knows what would happen.
Football is such a sports really, but football is such a inches kind of game.
It really is.
And if something goes one way versus the other, all you got to do is look at the Super Bowl, right? I mean, the Bengals had 4th and 1 at the 50, which you get 85% of the time you get the 1 yard that you need and you keep the drive going. They had probably the best kicker, at least most clutch kicker in the NFL, to tie the game, and easily enough time when you look at what they did to Kansas City and Tennessee,
for sure,
to even potentially win that game. But Aaron Donald makes a play and they lose, and that's like, man, just a hair of an inch. And when you look back at any of those crazy playoff games that we get to watch this past playoff year, all of those games were really close and could have gone either way.
Yeah, and you think even with like 6 minutes left, the Bengals are driving with the lead, and on 3rd down there was the drop ball that would have been a 1st down. And like, how would that narrative have changed if they would have kept that drive alive and scored again? So little plays make a big difference. Crazy.
You live and you die with sports. That's it, Brian. Brian Smith is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. He's the author of a new book called The Christian Athlete, releasing April 5th. I mean, all you got to say is The Christian Athlete, and it's pretty much in the wheelhouse of what we're all about here, faith, sports, and certainly the Christian athlete. When you were younger, which came first for you, sports or faith?
Yeah, I think I would have vocalized that faith came first, just because I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a very churchy type town. I was in a youth group growing up, and so I knew how to play the game of Christianity. I knew all the right things to say, but sports was absolutely an idol in my life. I grew up playing just about every sport imaginable. Because my dad was the coach, I got to play the marquee positions like point guard, shortstop, quarterback. Even though I was a small little runt, like I got to play everything. But then I got to high school, Jason, and our high school had, I think 700 kids in my graduating class. And within the first 3 weeks of my college or my freshman year, I got cut from soccer, football, and basketball. And it was like, yeah, what that did in my heart really revealed that I had an idolatry problem where my identity was in Brian as an athlete. And it was really hard for me to separate who I was when I was not playing sport because of that.
Brian Smith is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. He's with Athletes in Action, and he's got a new book, The Christian Athlete. This book, it feels like it's been a labor of love for you. So I want to dive into it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I had the idea probably in 2013 or 2014. Back then I was doing campus ministry at the University of Wisconsin. And a lot of the guys I was working with, there seemed to be this obsession with wanting to get to the number one spot or win the championship or whatever that is, conference championship, get to this spot so then they could honor God with their platform. And it seemed like everything that they were doing in life was trending towards this platform moment where then they could finally release God's will for their life. And I began to think, like, what does God want from an athlete who claims to be a Christian? Like, is he after only that high platform where somebody wins like something like the Super Bowl and then can say, I just want to thank Jesus, or I want to thank God and give God his glory on that national stage. And the more I was working with athletes, and even in my own spiritual growth and reading through the Bible, I became really convicted that God wants all of us and not just the outcome of what we're striving for. And so, just began to have this thought of like, man, competition is like 1% of the life of an athlete. Like they train and they practice and they interact with coaches and teammates, and they get injured and they deal with mental health issues and all these different categories of sport. And to think that God only cares, or maybe even that he cares most about the outcome of the competition, felt a little off to me. And so I just wanted to write something really for me. I didn't write it as a subject matter expert, but as somebody who's trying to learn, like, what does it actually look like to bring God into areas of sport, like relationships with teammates who you don't get along with, or what's a God honoring way to submit to the authority of your coach? What does it look like to go to practice and serve God instead of just serve yourself? And so I began to think through all these different categories of sport that take up the other 99% of an athletic experience, and figured out, what does it look like to honor God biblically in all these, the vastness of sport, and not just competition. Yes, competition, but full integration of the athlete experience.
It's a common question, a common theme that we talk about on this show. It's also something I really think hard about when I'm watching athletes, is how do you honor God as an athlete when the competition, as you described, is so fierce? I thought Cooper Kupp did a really good job of that throughout the year. And certainly when we were able to talk to him at the Super Bowl, and then watching him win the MVP, and then watching how he responded when he won the Super Bowl and won the MVP. But on the field of play, it gets so intense that sometimes our actions aren't backing up our words. What have you found with trying to live that out from the athletes that you've worked with and talked to?
Yeah, it's something. So I'll use my own experience, and I'll follow back up on athletes that I've worked with. So tonight I'm going to go play basketball with my dad, my brother, and a group of friends locally. And I just know, Jason, because of my natural bent, like if I don't check myself before I get on the court, there's a Brian that comes out that is not a fun person to be around, that is sassy, that takes things way too seriously, and is just not fun, and is, more importantly, not God honoring. And so before I even drive over to the court tonight, I need to remind myself, this is a game. My identity does not come from how many points I score or how good a defense I play or what other people think about me. My identity is from what God says is true about me, and I can bring that to the court. And so I constantly need to check myself. For the athletes that I work with, I have encouraged them to do a heart check before they get on the field of play, but also give themselves grace. Like, they are going to screw up and they're not going to do it perfectly. And what separates Christians from people who have not yet become a Christian is that they're forgiven. And so what does it look like in those moments where, yeah, maybe you say something to a ref that you wish you could take back? Apologize. Like, maybe you interact with a teammate or a rival in a way that is not honoring to God. Just apologize. And that could be during the game or afterwards. But that's really the marker of a Christian, is somebody who humbles themselves and says, yeah, I'm sorry, and receives that forgiveness.
You described me when you described yourself, because I used to play basketball all the time in a church league, by the way, Brian. This is as I'm in my 30s. I'm in my late 40s now, and I've since retired from basketball just because I'm getting older and it's too painful, literally. But my attitude was a big issue when I played, because I was competitive and I wanted to win. And I always thought that was a good thing, right? And I was encouraging, and I was like, come on. But I was very vocal. I would say things to the ref that I'm not proud of. And there was one moment where I was on the basketball court, maybe 10 years ago, and a ref made a bad call, and I called him out, and he just left. And by the way, the referee was a volunteer at our church who was just volunteering to ref. He's not a paid professional referee, Brian. But I think it was that moment where I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in a church league playing basketball, yelling at a volunteer ref who goes to our church and clearly not representing Jesus at all. And I used to just push it to the side and say, it's acceptable. It's just basketball. You know the real me when we're not playing basketball. But I was like, no, that's kind of not how this Christianity and our faith works. We take that with us everywhere we go, and we're a representative, an ambassador, as the Bible says, of Jesus everywhere we go. So I'm just smiling when you
yeah, absolutely. And in some ways like that, and I'll go back to me, like the Brian that comes out on the court, that is the real me. Like, that's my sinful by nature self. And so, like, yeah, I do get a glimpse of, like, man, there's just some immaturity and ugliness there. I was coaching my son's football league this year, his football team, and it was the last game of the season. And the other team was just this is 5th grade. And so we're not talking high schooler. This is 5th grade, because, yeah, barely can line up right. But the other team's taking forever to run the play. And so I'm like yelling at the ref because they're just milking the clock. We have the lead, but I want our kids to get the ball back. And so I'm yelling at the ref, like, they have 35 seconds, start your watch. And he kept saying, I'm starting it. And he wasn't. And then when the situation flipped and we got the ball back, I noticed he started looking at his watch, and almost for the entire stadium to hear, I yelled out, oh, now he's looking at his watch. And it's like, what am I doing? Why do I do that? And there's just this, again, I need to check myself before I get in those situations. Otherwise, just sinful nature takes over. And I've told our assistant coach, who's my brother-in-law, like, if I'm doing that, you need to hold me accountable and pull me aside and just tell me to stop. He didn't catch me in time that time.
Yeah, we got to have grace, with ourselves, that we're going to be a mess sometimes and make those mistakes. But, it's the old adage that you teach little kids, that your words and your actions matter. And, the analogy of the toothpaste, once you take the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. And that's really how, yes, you can, apologize and ask for forgiveness. And thankfully we have a God that we serve that does offer that. But that's not always the case with people. And that can ruin a testimony in some cases, can it?
For sure. Yeah. And it can also, if we're talking youth sports, it can also teach kids who are looking at us as examples that the outcome of a game, and even how you interact with people that are in authority over you, doesn't matter, that you can say whatever you want. And the most important thing is what you want. And the kids are watching, and they're learning from us as coaches and as parents and even as referees. And so there is wisdom in holding your tongue and showing some humility and being obedient to the authorities that God has placed, even in something as simple as sports.
Yeah, that's why people like Tony Dungy, Tony Bennett comes to mind.
Absolutely.
Some of these other amazing coaches are just so, you could sense that the spirit is within them, that they're as competitive as you can be, but there's also a gentleness and a godliness that comes out where they They don't often lose their temper too much. And I even saw this documentary recently, a couple days ago, on Inside the NBA. And Ernie Johnson's another guy, the host of Inside the NBA, where even the people around him were like, he's the most godly man I've ever met. And he very rarely gets high or low. He's always kind of in control. And when the situation gets difficult or, backs are against the wall, he just doesn't flinch, and he never goes to a place where he doesn't, want to go. And I always thought, man, that's where I want to be. That's how I want to be a representative, whether it's as a broadcaster, a dad, a husband, or anywhere in the sports world.
Yeah, and what a testimony to a watching world that's reactive and explosive, to see men and women of character who have perspective in those moments, and just have this unique ability to understand the bigger picture and still want to win and be competitive, but to do so in a way that shows this just gentleness and humility, like you mentioned.
Who are some of the believers that, we just probably named a couple of them, but that's all right. You can name them again if you want, who you've been most impressed with in sports that are living it out, whether it's a player, a coach, broadcaster. Who are some of those people that stand out for you?
Yeah. So I did not realize how solid Cooper Kupp was until the Super Bowl run. I think he actually did Athletes in Action. He attended Athletes in Action stuff when he was at Washington State. And so our staff guy there was telling me all about him. So I've loved listening to his interviews and just hearing his take. I think after the Super Bowl, he said something like, I wanted to bring my validation to the field and not take it from it, which was just like, yes. Oh my gosh, if every athlete could have a perspective like that, what could God do in and through the culture of sports?
Yeah.
Another one that's more of a hometown boy at Wisconsin was Chris Maragos. And I know you know Chris.
Yeah.
What I love about Chris is like if you don't know a whole lot of sports, like you're not going to know the name Chris Maragos. He won 2 Super Bowls, but he was a special teams ace, like absolutely amazing. But he's not a household name like a Peyton Manning or a Tim Tebow. But Chris started a Bible study at Wisconsin when he was either I want to say sophomore or junior year. And that Bible study, Jason, is still going on today because it's been passed down from senior to freshman. And I can name almost all, like, I think it's 12 guys now that Bible study has been passed down to.
Wow.
So when I think of Christian athletes, I think of people like Chris Maragos, not just for what he's done on the field, but legacies are left through people. And Chris did that at Wisconsin. I know he did that in the NFL. He's still doing it now.
Yeah, I know Chris pretty well. He's an amazing guy. I just moved back to Michigan, actually, in that area where you are. And that's what he's been about, whether it was during his career, whether it was in college or even post-playing career. He did that podcast with Nick Foles that he's been doing. And that's such a sign of a guy. Speaking of another guy, Nick Foles, right? Like that's a guy, that's about as godly a player as you'll ever come across in football. It's an interesting world, isn't it? Just to be in this faith and sports world, because even being at the Super Bowl, I saw a lot of guys who I know are believers. So this is not me judging at all. We didn't get a chance to talk to them though, because they were pitching brands or working through, with PR people and who had them on bigger platforms. But it's about living your faith out. And a guy like Demario Davis comes to mind too, who's always glorifying God, the Saints linebacker. What's been, I don't know, your impressions of, and you talked about this in your book, about the difference between sort of those cliched spiritual sayings that a lot of people have. They can give glory to God in any situation. Most of them usually do it only when they win, and you see that like at the Super Bowl. But the people who are really rooted in Christ, that are living that out in an amazing way, what have you seen as being the difference there?
Yeah. And again, I think we both hold this position. We're not placing judgment on anybody at all.
Correct. Yep.
As I read the Bible, we see in Isaiah, and then Jesus echoes this in Matthew, this idea that the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And when I first read both of those verses, I immediately thought sports. Just looking at my own life too, I would do that all the time. This thanking Jesus and wanting to honor God publicly, but knowing how messed up I was the rest of the week, and knowing that there really was no effort to integrate my faith in my sport and those other 99 categories like I talked about. And so what does it look like? It is at some level, and again, it's a growth process. We're all on a process of growth, but at some level, it's this marriage of a heart posture that wants to honor God in everything, and have that also come out of your mouth as well. And I think when you're just saying the right things, but you don't have a heart posture that's surrendered to the Lord, I'm not sure how honoring that is to God. So I think there needs to be a marriage of both, a heart posture that's trying to grow in all areas. And I think as athletes, I'm going to put myself in this category because I used to be one. We know when something's off. We know when the words that we say are not matching the lifestyle we're living.
Yeah, I call it the slow fade or the slow drift. I mean, we've heard it, from that song by Casting Crowns, but I've even preached on this topic, the slow drift. And if all it takes is a little bit of something that turns into a lot of bit of something, right? It's just a couple baby steps each day, a little bit away from God. And even though you know that it's happening, it's so slow that you hardly see it. But then you get 6 months or a year into it and you look back and you realize, oh, wow, like I haven't gone to church in forever. I don't think I've opened up my Bible in forever. I don't remember the last time I had somebody keeping me accountable about some of the things that I've been doing. It's this slow drift. Have you seen that with a lot of the people in your world, especially with Athletes in Action and the work that you do?
For sure. And honestly, Jason, I see it a lot from people who have reached the pinnacle of their sport. And so we talked all the time, my wife and I, when we were raising support to join staff with AIA, that you have one group of people that will achieve that, like the ultimate pinnacle of their sport. So whether that's they finally get to their personal best or they win a conference championship, state championship, like whatever it is, they've reached the top. And the joy of reaching the top does not last very long. Like it's great for like a week, maybe 2 weeks, but it slowly fades. And when it fades, you're left with this, I've worked a long time to reach this goal. And now I either have to do it again, but I know that if I do again, it's not going to be as satisfying. So it's like there's this weird internal process that takes place of like, if I gave my all God to this and it's not satisfying me, what other areas of life am I willing to forfeit a little bit because I know nothing's actually going to satisfy. So I think in that way you do see I have seen some backsliding just because people achieved everything and it wasn't satisfying. And if that wasn't, they kind of attribute that to God. And so they seek happiness other ways. The other way, and this is the other like 98% of athletes, they don't reach the top. Whether it's they get injured, they don't get an opportunity from their coach, they play for the Lions and they get a bunch of bad breaks, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're never going to reach that pinnacle of their sport. And so they're left with like, God, I'm trying to do everything. And they have this false belief, and I did too, that the primary way that God should bless us is on the field of competition. It's that God, if I'm obedient in all these other areas, then what that's going to look like for you is to bless me with a state championship in track or a conference championship in cross country. And God doesn't make contracts like that. God cannot be manipulated like that. And I think you see a fade when people start to realize like they have this false belief that God's holding out on me. Like I'm not reaching the top. So it's God's fault. Like it can't be my fault. God's holding out on me. And so another way that I've seen people kind of slide away is they just attribute any sort of success that they want to God blessing them. And when they don't get it, they backslide.
You don't see this too often. And it's, even when we were at the Super Bowl, we got to ask questions to both teams and players about their faith. I would love to be in a locker room and talk to a believer after they lose a big game. It's never happened. I've had it happen, months removed, but I'm talking about literally like the minute, and just ask them, what did God teach you in this loss? And just see where their mindset is. Some may still be really ticked off and not interested in going there, and that's understandable, but you never hear players. Sometimes you do with coaches. I think Monty Williams, who's on our cover of our magazine, did that really well when Phoenix lost to Milwaukee in the NBA Finals. But you don't see it a lot with players after a loss. You see it with the winners. God is good and so grateful to God for this blessing of winning a championship. But you very rarely see it with with a losing team or a losing player, I would love to talk to people right after that and just see where their heart is. Obviously, you're so distraught and upset that you lost, but I know there's guys out there that could do that. And you don't ever hear it, right?
Yeah. And Jason, I think everybody, Christians and non-Christians alike, expect people to give God his due when things go well. I think when things don't go well and people like Monty Williams and other people that, hopefully as a culture, we can start giving them a microphone to speak into these truths. When things don't go well and they're still able to say, God is enough. I trust him and I love him. This didn't work out as I wanted to, but my joy is still in him. I think that begins to mess with people who are listening to that and wondering, like, what is it about this person that they seem content in the midst of what should have been this like life-crushing loss. And I think that's where evangelism in sports really comes in, is when an outside world can see people who are at the bottom of their sport still say Jesus is enough. That to me is a more powerful witness than somebody at the top with an MVP trophy still saying, thank you, God, this is for you. I give you all the credit, which is still good, right? Like we still need to celebrate that. But I think lives begin to be changed when people at the bottom show that they found contentment in Jesus. And I think that really does mess with people because it's so different in our society.
It's real life. I mean,
it's completely real life.
We can celebrate all the great accomplishments when we get new roles or when we release new books like The Christian Athlete. But what about when you go through a real tragic period? Our brother-in-law, my wife and I's brother-in-law, tragically passed back in January in a shocking way at 53 out of nowhere. Are you still giving God the glory then? And that's where I think your faith is really tested. So when you put that to the sports field or the world of sports, that's the sign, right? When things aren't going really well, that your faith is still solid and really guiding you and not the performance-driven aspect of what sports is.
For sure. And I think that's a really good measuring stick of how things are going. And then to think, even Jason, like there were 110 million people, right, around there that watched the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Like our world is just, and there's 1 billion that watch the World Cup. Our world is captivated by sports. It's a common language. So we're doing refugee foster care right now. We have 2 Afghanistan brothers living with us, completely different cultures, completely different religions. But we played soccer the other day and we played volleyball the other day, and we were able to communicate and share something in common where it's like cultural lines were crossed and we were still able to communicate. And there's just this common language and beauty of sport that God has given us, and the world is paying attention. There's so many opportunities, yes, for the winners, but also for the losers and everywhere in between for us to learn what does it look like to honor God with our lifestyle, but also our words in these moments, because people are watching. People are watching and they're reading and they're listening.
Got to be about it, not just talk about it. That's for sure. The book is called The Christian Athlete. Brian Smith is our guest from Athletes in Action. Brian, thanks for joining us, buddy. Really enjoyed this conversation. Best wishes on the book. Congratulations. I know it's hard to write a book, and I'm glad that you wrote this one, though, The Christian Athlete. Everybody needs to go get yourself a copy, and let's do it again. Let's have another conversation, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
That'd be great. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate you.
And many thanks to Brian Smith for being here today on Sports Spectrum. His new book, The Christian Athlete, releases April 5th, so you can go get a copy there. TheChristianAthlete.com is the website. You can go check out TheChristianAthlete.com. Brian is on staff with Athletes in Action and the great work that they are doing. Just appreciate Brian for the candor in the conversation that we had today. A lot of different places that we went, and I think a lot of it pertains to the kind of conversations that we normally have here on Sports Spectrum, maybe minus the Detroit Lions fandom. And you can tell Brian is a diehard Lions fan, that's for sure. Maybe someday. I mean, listen, the Bengals got to the Super Bowl this year, so could the Lions get there? Absolutely. Will they get there in the next 2 years? Who knows? But I appreciate Brian for being here today on the show, sharing his love of the Lions, but even more talking about living out our faith in the sports world. So appreciate Brian for being here today on Sports Spectrum. We appreciate you as well. you guys make this show. You really do. And if you guys aren't a part of this, it's very hard for people to even know about Sports Spectrum or to listen. So thank you for tuning in, but thank you for also sharing about Sports Spectrum to someone else. It's been our desire for 30 plus years to bring Jesus into the sports conversation. Thought we did that today with Brian Smith, and I hope we continue to do that with every interview and conversation that we have here on this show. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you click that subscribe or that follow button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Tell someone about the show, and then join us next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.